edition of the New York Times, WQXR.
Yes, our Gilbert and Sullivan theme is back again tonight, because so is the continuation of our replay of the wonderful G&S special from 1962 that we began last week. That was the occasion, you may recall, when Commander Edward Whitehead, for many years host of our popular travel series This is Britain, came back to interview his countryman, and probably the most famous Savoyard of all, Martyn Green. Our album memories, as always, are sponsored by Marine Midland Bank, whose reputation for service has been built on commitment and vision. When we ran out of time last week in our replay of WQXR's 1962 G&S special, Commander Whitehead and Martyn Green were talking about diction, specifically the vital importance of diction if Gilbert's art, as well as Sullivan's, is to be appreciated to the fullest.
I think that your diction and clear enunciation is one of your greatest attributes. It comes through on records as well as it does live. There's only one of your songs that I'm never quite sure whether it's supposed to be comprehensible right to the very end, and that's the modern Major General from the Pirates. Do you think we could listen now to the very model of a modern Major General?
I am the very model of a modern Major General, yes.
I am the very model of a modern Major General. I've information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I know the kings of England. I can quote the fights historical from Marathon to Waterloo in order categorical. I am very well acquainted too with matters mathematical. I understand equations, both the simple and quadratical. About binomial theorem, I am teeming with a lot of news. A lot of news. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. With many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse. I'm very good at integral and differential calculus. I know the scientific names of beings animalculous. In short, in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, I am the very model of a modern Major General. In short, in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, I am the very model of a modern Major General. I know our mythic history, King Arthur's answer paradox. I answer hard acrostics, I have a pretty taste for paradox. I quote in Eliot Jarks all the crimes of Heliogabalus. In conics, I can floor peculiarities parabolus. I can tell undoubted Raphaels from Gerard Dozen's Ophanes. I know the croaking chorus from the frogs of Aristophanes. Then I can hum a fugue of which I've heard the music's dinner for. Oh dear, dinner for. And whistle all the airs from that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the airs from that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the airs from that infernal nonsense pinafore. And whistle all the airs from that infernal nonsense pinafore. Then I can write a washing bill in Babylonic uniform and give you every detail of Caraticus's uniform. In short, in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, I am the very model of a modern Major General. In short, in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, he is the very model of a modern Major General. In fact, when I know what is meant by mamelon and ravelin, when I can tell at sight a Mauser rifle from a javelin, when such affairs as sorties and surprises I'm more wary at, and when I know precisely what is meant by commissariat, when I have learnt what progress has been made in modern gunnery, when I know more of tactics than a novice in a nunnery, in short, when I've a smattering of elemental strategy, oh dear, strategy, fatagy, matagy, batagy, I have it. You'll say a better Major General has never sat a G. You say a better Major General has never sat a G. You say a better Major General has never sat a G. You say a better Major General has never sat a G. For my military knowledge, though I'm plucky and adventurous, has only been brought down to the beginning of the century. But still in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, I am the very model of a modern Major General. But still in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, he is the very model of a modern Major General. Yes, my military knowledge, though I'm plucky and adventurous, has only been brought down to the beginning of the century. But still in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, I am the very model of a modern Major General.
You were saying, Commander, that you were wondering whether this particular song was supposed to be comprehensible. As I say, yes, I think it is. But if you listen to the end of that particular rendering of that song, you will find that the chorus are utterly incomprehensible. Well, now that was done very deliberately. As you heard, I went back to one point as if I were taking an encore, more or less, increased the tempo to such a speed that when the chorus picked it up, they couldn't sing at that speed. So I had them just sing, but still in matters vegetable. And that is where they stopped. But still in matters vegetable, general. And that is what they hear. And it was done intentionally to create this rather silly idea that they were so fast they couldn't sing it at that speed. Actually, the orchestra came to me afterwards and said, you know, we had a little bit of difficulty in moving our fingers fast enough.
Didn't you have a difference of opinion in your first meeting with now Sir Malcolm Sargent back in 1926, was it, on the subject of articulation? Or
No, that was not articulation. He had taken over the stick for that particular season of the Prince's Theatre, and it was the Gondoliers. And I was playing Antonio at the role, and Antonio has that lovely song and dance, For the Merriest Fellows Are We.
Yes.
And at the rehearsal, Malcolm began this at a tempo that was, well, approaching grand operatic, you know, For the merriest fellows are we, tra-la, tra-la. And I said I was terribly sorry, but that was too slow. Well, that was the beginning of the bother. And we left it at that time, and eventually we got back to the rehearsal. He was then in the pit with the orchestra, and I was on the stage, and I began again, and still I couldn't dance at that speed. I stopped. He said, what's the matter? I said, I think he was Dr. Sargent in those days. And Dr. Sargent, I have to dance here. What goes up must come down, and the force of gravity has its own tempo, and that's the tempo it must go at. I cannot remain suspended in the air. Well, that's all very well, but we must take this at a slower tempo than the one you wish to take it at. Because if we take it at that tempo, nobody will hear the words. No, I don't mean yours. They'll hear yours, we know that. But they'll never hear the chorus words. I said, oh, do you know what the chorus words are, Dr. Sargent? He said, no, I can't recall them just at the moment. I said, well, I'll tell you. They're tra-la-la-la. The orchestra collapsed, and I got it at my tempo.
Mr. Green, in your own case, with something like 25 or 27 years in
approximately 27.
27 years with the Doyle Card Company, playing Gilbert and Sullivan operas, you were living so much of your time in another world, in a make-believe world created by two brilliant men who had concocted these imaginary and highly beguiling slices of life which entertain other people forever after. But doesn't it have some effect on you? You're living a sort of dual life all the time. One moment you're Coco, one moment you're the Lord High Chancellor, and the next moment you're Martyn Green.
An effect? I suppose, yes, it has the effect of keeping one constantly on one's toes and fresh, and therefore, quite candidly, young at heart.
You never got bored with it?
Yes, during the day when I wasn't performing, but as soon as I got into the theatre, once again, the whole, you know,
you were doing your stuff.
Spirit rises in you, and
yes.
as you put the grease paint on your face, you sort of get onto your toes.
I know.
And it's interesting, mind you. After you've played them for the length of time I did, there does come a time when you can get so far and you can get no further, and except sliding downhill again, which was one of the reasons, I think, why I eventually decided not to accept the contract that was offered me, coupled with the fact that the contract that was offered me did not come up to my expectations, and I decided then to sever my connection with the D'Oyly Carte.
I'd like to bring out some of this latter part of your life since you left D'Oyly Carte, but before we leave Gilbert and Sullivan, will you make a selection of a musical interpolation?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'd like to tell a story before we select the number very quickly, if I may. But I was at college, and it was one Saturday afternoon. I was up at the West End having some tea, and I ran into two college friends. One in particular, I remember his name, B.R.L. Smith, who was an organist and a very fine musician. They were going along to the Princess Theatre to see the Gondoliers. Would I care to go along? Gilbert and Sullivan. I said, what's that? He said, oh, it's a light opera. And we had some dinner at Le Dîner Français in Soho. I think the dinner was 3 and 6pence.
I can remember the price as well.
5 shillings with a bottle of beer, you know, and a very fine steak at that. And we then went into and stood at the back of the circle. That was very cheap, 3 and 6pence. And in the second act of the Gondoliers, Leo Sheffield was playing the Grand Inquisitor, has occasion to say that it wasn't quite correct for a cook to be dancing and playing leapfrog with the Lord Chancellor. It was all right for a Lord Chamberlain to play leapfrog with the Lord Chancellor, because a Lord Chancellor may say to a Lord Chamberlain, tuck in your tuppenny. A cook could not say that to a Lord Chamberlain or a Lord Chancellor. Well, now this tickled me to such an extent, and my two friends, that we laughed and we laughed and we laughed and were eventually flung out of the theatre because we were making too much noise.
So this was your first experience of a Gilbert and Sullivan
That was my
audience,
first
as
experience,
well as
yes.
a Gilbert and Sullivan production.
Oh, we were hushed.
Let's have something from the Gondoliers before we enter the last phase of this conversation.
Why not? The Duke of Plaza Toro's, it's his number when he explains to everybody an enterprise of martial kind when there was any fighting.
In enterprise of martial kind when there was any fighting, he led his regiment from behind, he found it less exciting. But when away his regiment ran, his place was in the fore, that celebrated, cultivated, underrated nobleman, the Duke of Plaza Toro. In the first and foremost night, you always found that night, that celebrated, cultivated, underrated nobleman, the Duke of Plaza Toro. When to evade destruction's hand, to hide they all proceeded. No soldier in that gallant band hit half as well as he did. He lay concealed throughout the war, and so preserved his core, that unaffected, undertaken, well-connected warrior, the Duke of Plaza Toro. In every part he did, he always took the head, that unaffected, undertaken, well-connected warrior, the Duke of Plaza Toro. When told that they would all be shot unless they left the service, that hero hesitated, not so marvelous his nerve is. He sent his resignation in, the first of all his corps, that very knowing, overflowing, easygoing paladin, the Duke of Plaza Toro. You men of closer play, he always showed the way, that very knowing, overflowing, easygoing paladin, the Duke of Plaza Toro. That very knowing, overflowing, easygoing paladin, the Duke of Plaza Toro.
This is Commander Whitehead speaking with Mr. Martyn Green, King of the Savoyards. We'll be back in a moment.
King and Commander, they did make quite a combination. Commander Edward Whitehead had left his own group, done a Broadway musical, as I recall, and also been involved in a horrible elevator accident that required the amputation of one leg. These were some of the subjects that the commander broached during the final portion of the program, and I think you'll agree the courage with which Martyn Green faced these new challenges shines through in a very special way indeed.
Can we touch on your career since you left the D'Oyly Carte company? Tell us what you've been doing lately and what are your immediate plans?
Well, strange enough, my immediate plans are going to be some more Gilbert and Sullivan, but not the operettas. There's a show in preparation at the moment called Mr. Gilbert, Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Green, which is going to be very freely based on their lives, interpolating some of the highlights of the various operettas, the musical numbers.
Will this be produced as on Broadway?
Eventually, we're due to open in England, as a matter of fact, sometime in September at the moment. After that, we hope to come to Broadway. In the meantime, since I left the company, I've played Shaw, I've played O'Casey, I've done some Gore Vidal, had a wonderful time.
Which one is?
Alternating with Visit to a Small
Oh,
Planet.
yes, of course, yes.
Alternating with Cyril Ritchard.
Yes.
And the strange thing is that the show that Richard Doyley Cart was producing when he wanted Gilbert to provide a curtain raiser that eventually became the main piece was the reason why I had to alternate with Cyril Ritchard, because this was when he went to the Metropolitan to appear in Perico. It's funny how it sort of goes round in a circle, and Perico gets mixed up with Gilbert and Sullivan once again, at least with an artist.
Mr. Green, I was not intending to refer to your recent and frightful accident in 1959, but I must for two reasons. You seem to be quite remarkably mobile, barely using your cane, and I note from your autobiography that the First World War injury left you not expecting to walk again, and that you recovered despite your doctor's opinion, apparently because you were determined to pick up your first job on the stage.
I mean, after all, you can't live without earning a living, and as I wanted to go onto the stage, I had to have two legs to get on it with. And most of the stuff I was doing this was before Gilbert and Sullivan. I went into musical comedy, and I had to do a certain amount of dancing. It took me quite a long time to learn to dance again, but I eventually did, with the help of my sister, on a ballroom floor to begin with. But one of the funniest things about this World War I wound and my recent accident, if I had lost the leg a little higher than I did, in other words, above the knee, I should have lost a life pension for the wound I received, which was in the knee.
This is a technicality of the...
Yes. The wound would have gone, and therefore it would not have been in any shape or form causing me any trouble. Not that it caused me a great deal. I managed to use the leg, but I danced mostly on the right foot and touched the floor with the left one every now and again. And who knows, I might be able to do that again.
You know, in a series that I was doing for WQXR for a long time called This is Britain, I had a program devoted to the rise of sea power in Britain, and I used your recording of Sir Joseph Porter's song from Pinafore to great effect to illustrate the period during which officers of the Royal Navy in fact obtained their commissions and later their promotions for reasons other than their nautical skills. Do sing me a snatch of that song. Polishing up the handle on the big front door.
I think the opening of that particular, the recit, is about the most indicative and part of the dialogue rate later on. And one of the funny things about the Pinafore, the whole thing of getting their commissions, their promotion and so on, I'm right, I believe, in saying that no naval officer would do anything other than salute when wearing uniform. But on board HMS Pinafore, whenever the captain, Captain Cochrane, mentions the name of Sir Joseph Porter, our Admiralty's First Lord, he doesn't salute, he raises his hat.
Very unorthodox.
Yes.
Can you recall a little of the patter leading into the song, or the part of the song?
The entrance, Sir Joseph entrance, I think is perfectly beautiful. I am the monarch of the sea, the ruler of the Queen's navy, whose praise Great Britain loudly chants. When at anchor here I ride, and my bosom swells with pride, and I snap my fingers at the foeman's taunts. But when the breezes blow, I generally go below, and seek the seclusion that the cabin grants.
Splendid.
I think it's so typical, because he's a civilian and never been to sea in his life.
But if I may say so, you looked so magnificent in the role.
Oh, thank you.
Let's hear the recording of that song now, as sung by yourself. Mr. Green, we don't need to do any name-dropping this evening, but I do recall that in conversation you told me that it was indirectly through you that Walter Houston became so famous with his September song. How did that come about?
It was rather funny in a way. I had just returned from seeing Rupert Doyley-Cart. As a matter of fact, I'd been signing a contract. Robert Sherwood wrote me and asked me to read a libretto, a script of a new musical by Maxwell Anderson and Kurt Weill, I think it was. And it was Knickerbocker Holiday. They were very interested in me for the part of Peter Stuyvesant, the first governor of Manhattan. And would I consider it? They very badly wanted me, and so on, and I loved it. And I think I just had, as a matter of fact, signed my contract, because I recall saying to Sherwood that I was very sorry. I'd love to do it, but I was under contract. They'd only called me 2 hours earlier. I would have accepted. But I just signed a contract with Kurt. Earlier, I would have accepted. But I just signed a contract with Kurt. He said, "Oh, don't worry about that." He said, "We'll talk to Kurt. I think we can very soon buy you out of that lot." Well, he was an optimist, because Kurt wouldn't let go. The result was that they found themselves then in quite a pickle. For heaven's sake, who are we going to get? We've just been banking on you, and can you think of anybody? And out of the blue, I said, "Well, what about Walter Houston?" "Brilliant, what an idea." I said, "Can he sing?" He said, "Doesn't matter, but he can act this. Anyway, what a brilliant idea. Thank you very much indeed." And the end of that year, I think it was 38, I was in Philadelphia, and Walter Houston was just finishing the week, or a week, with Knickerbocker Holiday, and I went to see a matinee. He must have heard I was in front. I went round to see him afterwards. I say he must have heard I was in front, because he said, "You know, I've never been so embarrassed in my life. Mr. Green, it's a great pleasure to meet you, but I was so embarrassed, and you know, I was conscious the whole time." I couldn't help it, and I'm very, very sincere when I say this, that I looked at him for a moment and I said, "You know, Mr. Houston, for the first time in my life, I can say I am glad I didn't get a role that I wanted. Because if I'd taken that role, I'd never have had the pleasure of seeing you and hearing you sing the September song."
Very gracious.
Really, no, I really meant it, because he was so delicious,
Suited him
so
so well.
delightful. I had one of the loveliest afternoons in the theatre I've had for some time.
When I was a young man courting the girls, I played me a waiting game. If a maid refused me with tossing curls, I'd let the old earth take a couple of whirls, while I plied her with tears in place of pearls. And as time came around, she came my way. As time came around, she came. But it's a long, long while from May to December, and the days grow short when you reach September, and the autumn weather turns the leaves to flame, and I haven't got time or the waiting game. And the days turn to gold as they grow few. September, November, and these few golden days I'd share with you. These golden days I'd share with you. And the wine dwindles down to a precious brew. September, November, and these few vintage years I'd share with you. These vintage years I'd share with you.
Then the other name that I wanted to introduce, because of his connection with this, is Danny Kaye.
Oh, yes.
Perhaps before we tell the story of your meeting Why don't we listen to one of his parodies of Gilbert and Sullivan?
I listen to them quite frequently. I have the whole set.
When you're lying awake with a dismal headache and repose is taboo by anxiety, I conceive you may use any language you choose to indulge in without impropriety. For your brain is on fire, the bedclothes conspire of usual slumber to plunder you. First your counterpane goes in and covers your toes, and your sheet slips demurely from under you. Then the blanketing tickles, you feel like mixed pickles, so terribly sharp is the pricking. And you're hot and you're cross and you tumble and toss till there's nothing twixt you and the ticking. Then the bedclothes all creep to the ground in a heap, and you pick them all up in a tangle. Next your pillow resigns or politely declines to remain at its usual angle. Well, you get some repose in the form of a doze with hot eyeballs and head ever aching, but your slumbering teems with those horrible dreams that you'd very much better be waking. For you dream you are ill, having swallowed a pill that was made out of ossified onyx, and the doctor you found, he is traveling around on a subway that's bound for the Bronx. Oh, you must find him fast as the hours go past. You're convinced you are headed for tragedy, for you saw him on Sunday, felt much worse on Monday, and here it's the following Saturday. You're full of suspicion that traveling physician, he fed you some stuff with a barb in it, so you dash to the street while you frantically eat a souffle made of sodium bicarbonate. To a druggist you rush, but he gives you the brush saying, who let this asthmatic aspirin? Though you plead with a villain, you need penicillin, he won't even give you an aspirin. Then a pill on the shelf leaps down by itself and it lands on your head like a lead post. You suddenly awaken, no wonder you ache. You've been hitting yourself with a bedpost. You're a regular wreck with a crick in your neck, and no wonder you snore, for your head's on the floor and you've needles and pins from your soles to your shins, and your flesh is a creep and your leg is asleep and you're cramping your toes and a fly on your nose and some fluff in your lung and a feverish tongue and a thirst that's intense and a general sense that you haven't been sleeping in clover. But the darkness has passed, and it's daylight at last, and the night has been long. Ditto, ditto, my son, and thank goodness they're both of them over.
Now, how did all this come about? You met Danny Kaye.
Well, in the first instance, I believe his wife wrote the lyrics. And I met him one day, and we were talking, strange enough. I'd heard them, I think, for the first time. And he said, oh, I just love Gilbert and Sullivan. I love Gilbert and Sullivan. I'd love to do it. But my trouble is that once I start, I can't help. I have to go haywire. I said, well, I go most delightfully haywire. I adore them, and I'd very much like to get a set of these records of yours. I've tried, and I don't seem to be able to. Are they out of print or something? Because if they are, can you get me one? And autograph it for me, please. He looked at me and said, all right, I'll get you a set, but on one condition only. I said, oh, what's that condition? He said, that we never speak to each other again.
How very sweet. Now, regrettably, the time has come to wind up this, to me, most enjoyable conversation, but I think it would be wrong to end on even such a high note as Danny Kaye. I think we should have one more traditional item from Gilbert and Sullivan as sung by Martyn Green to finish with.
Well, now, what could... Oh, I tell you what I'd like you to hear. And if it's going to wind the program, let me tell you this first. That Gilbert, when somebody had heard this song, read the lyrics, and said, that seems to be pretty well a description of yourself, Sir William. He said, of course it is. After all, when one's got a reputation, one should live up to it, don't you think? Well, this is King Gama's first song in that respectful musical perversion of Tennyson's Princess.
To which we referred
If you'll give me your attention, I will tell you what I am. It's a perfect description by Gilbert of himself.
If you'll give me your attention, I will tell you what I am. I'm a genuine philanthropist, all other kinds are sham. Each little fault of temper and each social defect in my erring fellow creatures I endeavor to correct. To all their little weaknesses I open people's eyes, and little plans to snub the self-sufficient I devise. I love my fellow creatures, I do all the good I can, yet everybody says I'm such a disagreeable man, and I can't think why. To compliments inflated I've a withering reply, and vanity I always do my best to mortify. A charitable action I can skillfully dissect, and interested motives I'm delighted to detect. I know everybody's income and what everybody earns, and I carefully compare it with the income tax returns. But to benefit humanity, however much I plan, yet everybody says I'm such a disagreeable man, and I can't think why. I'm sure I'm no ascetic. I'm as pleasant as can be. You'll always find me ready with a crushing repartee. I've an irritating chuckle. I've a celebrated sneer. I've an entertaining snigger. I've a fascinating leer. To everybody's prejudice, I know a thing or two. I can tell a woman's age in half a minute, and I do. But to benefit humanity, however much I plan, yet everybody says I'm such a disagreeable man, and I can't think why. He can't think why. I can't think why.
Now, after that splendid perversion, I think nothing remains but for me to thank you, Mr. Green, undisputed king of the Savoyards, the man most indissolubly linked with Gilbert and Sullivan, and a man whom we all admire and respect. Thank you for being here, and I hope our audience have enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you, Commander. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and if they've enjoyed it as much as we have, they've had a good time, I'm sure.
Splendid. Good night.
Good night.
So that's it, our Gilbert and Sullivan special of July 1962, hosted by Commander Edward Whitehead and featuring Martyn Green. Both of them are gone now, but both, I think it's safe to say, are well enshrined in the memory of most WQXR longtime listeners. And it certainly has been a joy to hear them again on our anniversary album tonight. And so we've come full circle with the overture to Mikado. It started our proceedings last week. Now, I've been trying to figure out why we have 9 or 10 minutes left. And the only thing I can imagine is that this was a 90-minute special or some such. In any event, we do have a little extra time. And since we have been dealing with two great Englishmen, I thought we would add a third. When I was in England, and I can't remember exactly when now, 74, I think, or thereabouts,